When people talk about heavy metal, they often talk about bands from England or the United States, but heavy metal also grew strong roots in Japan. Starting in the 1970s, Japanese bands took the heavy sounds they loved and shaped them into something new. This is part of a series called Discovering Metal Bands from Other Countries. The country of Japan was requested by Rock of All Ages in a recent live stream, so I thought it would be a good idea to talk about heavy metal in Japan from the beginning, because I think most people know Japanese metal from the popular bands, or those girl bands as I will call it, baby metal, love bites, but I want to explore something deeper than that. Maybe later I'll do a video on those bands, but for now I want to talk about Japanese metal in the 70s and 80s. I'm going to do it by covering 9 albums, and I will do this video covering the music and the history behind the music. So let me get into it. The story begins in the early 1970s with Flower Travellin Band. Their album, Satori, is often called the first true heavy metal album from Japan. The sound of Satori is slow, dark, and heavy. Guitars are thick and loud with long riffs that feel hypnotic. Songs are not short or catchy, they feel more like journeys. The mood is serious, almost spiritual. Vocals are deep and emotional, sometimes sounding mysterious or distant. The band uses silence and space, which makes the heavy parts feel even heavier when they arrive. Satori sounds closer to early Black Sabbath than to pop or rock music. At the time, nothing else in Japan sounded like this. The album showed that Japanese bands could create dark and powerful, heavy music from the very beginning. Now, for me personally, I found it very interesting. It reminded me a lot of early albums of Blue Oyster Cult. I also heard elements that reminded me of the original Alice Cooper band. There was a little bit of psychedelic rock, which reminded me a little bit of The Doors, and overall, it was a pretty cool album. It's not something I'm going to go back to often, but I think everyone should listen to it just to get an idea of the type of music that was being recorded back in those early days. By the mid-1970s, Japanese heavy music became faster and more energetic. One of the most important bands of that time was Bow Wow. Their album Charge shows the band moving from hard rock towards true heavy metal. The sound of Charge is loud, fast, and very tight. Guitar playing is sharp and technical, but still fun and catchy. Songs are driven by strong riffs and powerful drumming. Unlike Satori, this album feels more energetic and upbeat. It was another interesting album, much different than the previous album, Satori, as I spoke about. It was more of an energetic, hard rock type of album. I heard influences from Deep Purple, but I also heard a lot of influences from those glam rock bands like Slade or T-Rex. They had that galloping guitar sound and a little bit of the Stooges as well. But again, another pretty fun album. I would say my favorite song was track number 7, called Heavy. Overall, that's something I'm going to be listening to often, but it was interesting, and check it out if you want to get an idea of some early Japanese metal. Moving into the late 1970s and early 1980s, image and melody became more important. One band that represented this change was 44 Magnum. Their album Danger is a perfect example of Japanese metal becoming more polished and stylish. The album mixes heavy metal with glam and hard rock. Guitars are heavy but clean. Songs are catchy with strong choruses that stay in your head. Vocals are dramatic and emotional, sometimes soft, sometimes aggressive. The album feels flashy and bold, but still has real metal power behind it. Danger shows how Japanese metal bands could balance heaviness with melody. For me, I thought it was very enjoyable. I would say they sound like a cross between 80s Judas Priest and the first 2 Motley Crue albums, which would make sense. It was released in 1983, so I'm sure they were listening to some of those new wave of British heavy metal bands, as well as some of the music of the Sunset Strip. I also know the first 2 albums by Quiet Riot with Randy Rhoads were also released in Japan at that time, so I can see that being another influence on this band. No Japanese metal band is more famous worldwide than Loudness, and their most important album is Disillusion. The sound of Disillusion is fast, powerful, and very professional. Guitar work by Akira Takasaki is the highlight. His playing is quick, melodic, and very precise. The mix of speed metal with strong hooks. Songs move fast, but they're not messy. Every note feels planned and controlled. Vocals are strong and clear, and the English lyrics help the band reach international fans. Disillusion sounds like it could stand next to any Western metal album of the time. The record proved that Japanese metal bands could compete on a global level. Now, out of all these bands that on our list, this was the only one I was familiar with going into this discography or going into this video preparation. This album had two versions, one in Japanese, one in English. I listened to the Japanese version. To me, it sounded like the traditional heavy metal of the 1980s, but also with some neoclassical shredding in the first few songs. I felt the album had a very familiar sound. You can hear the influence from many other bands that were playing metal around this time. It's had a lot more guitar shredding than some of the others, so if that's something you like, I think you should check out this band. It would also be a good band for a ranking video, so I may do that at some point in the future. But the next band I want to talk about is called Earthshaker, and the album I listened to was called Fugitive. Now, the sound of Fugitive is melodic and emotional, but still heavy. Guitars are smooth and polished. Songs are focused on strong melodies. Vocals are very expressive and emotional. They often carry the song more than the guitars. The music feels dramatic, almost cinematic at times. Fugitive shows that heavy metal can be emotional and beautiful, not just loud and aggressive. This helps metal reach listeners who might not have liked heavier styles. I thought this was another good one. I felt the sound was similar to those first wave glam metal bands like Rat and Dokken. They weren't going for speed. There wasn't a lot of shredding. There was a lot of heavy, distorted power chords, and big vocals and guitar solos were more on the melodic side. It had a clean production value. It almost sounded like it was recorded live in the studio. And I recommend checking out the music video. So overall, another pretty cool band. This next band is pretty cool. It's called Sekima 2. And this band is more of a theatrical band, a little bit of a shock rock. And the first time a Japanese band did that, as far as I know. The album I listened to is called The End of the Century. And this is considered their defining work. It's like classic heavy metal, but a little bit more dramatic. I found them similar to bands like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, but with some theatricality, with influences from Alice Cooper or Twisted Sister. There was this progressive rock element in there with a few songs with keyboards used with the guitars. Vocals are very over the top. They had this like demon image, and the songs are very grand and dramatic. They were almost like metal operas. But despite the costumes and the humor and all that, the music is very well played. This album shows how metal in Japan was fun and strange and still heavy. Probably one of my favorites, because I like this type of heavy metal where it's like theatrical shock rock, but also just straight ahead heavy metal. So probably my favorite of the group. Now another one from the 80s is Dead End in the album Ghost of Romance. This one is a little darker, but it sounds a lot like glam metal of the late 80s, maybe the early 90s. A lot of it reminded me of a band like Lynch Mob, like especially in the guitar playing. But then there are other bands that came to mind like Mr. Big or late 80s Motley Crue. It was like glam metal, but a little heavier. So if I'm like throwing out all these names at you, but I'll even throw in Skid Row, something along those lines. But they had this other element to their sound. It was like this gothic component, kind of like Killing Joke and Bauhaus. So there was a little bit of that in the sound. So I know I'm like mixing all these different band names together, but that's kind of like what I got from listening to this band. But I thought it was good. Not one of my favorites. If I was ranking these, it would probably come somewhere in the middle. But again, it's all part of the experience in discovering Japan. Now we get to the end of the 80s, and this is a band that I've heard of, but my first time listening to them, called X, but then later they were called X Japan. The album is called Vanishing Vision. Now this album, fast, chaotic, emotional, it's kind of like speed metal, but then it can get softer at times. Guitars are aggressive and sharp, drums are fast and intense, vocals are raw and emotional, sometimes angry, sometimes sad. The album is very dangerous and wild, but it's very raw, it's not polished. It's just the kind of album that is really good if you like that more like raw sound. For me, I didn't like it as much. It didn't really click with me, but it could be a grower if I spent more time with it. Okay, I have one more. It's an all-female band called Shoya, and their sixth album called Glamour, released on August 24th, 1988. And here's some interesting trivia. There was one single called Asizazu Near. I'm not even going to be able to say that, but the English translation is Still Be Hanging On. And it's actually an unused demo from Cheap Trick in their Lap of Luxury album. So I guess they got permission to use that. And there are two like English and Japanese versions. I forgot which version I listened to, and this album was mixed by Andy Johns in Los Angeles. So that's pretty cool. And it reached number 16 on the Japanese music chart. And this one, I guess you can compare them to those Japanese girl bands like Love Bites or Bandmate or Baby Metal, that type of thing. But very 80s sounding. So a better comparison would probably be the band Vixen. The music is flashy, fast-paced. There's electronic elements, there's keyboards, but it has that 80s like arena rock, like glam metal sound. For me, it was okay. It's probably the kind of album I would have to like spend some more time with. I thought it was okay. There was another album that was released in 1989 that was recommended when I did like a Google search called Outer Limits. Supposedly that was their breakout album. I wanted to talk about that one, but I couldn't find it on streaming. So I decided to go one album behind that with Glamour. That's where I listened to. But I don't know, like this band has released lots of albums, so maybe I'll check out all of them at some point. And that is all. Those are 9 albums. I originally wanted to do 10, but there was another band that I wanted to check out, but I couldn't find them online. So I did 9. As usual, when I make these videos, please comment Japanese bands or albums that I can listen to, and then I can do a special viewer's choice video if I get enough responses. But in the meantime, next country I will be exploring will be Argentina. And if you want to see all my videos for this particular series, they're all in a playlist right here. Because I started out with Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Spain, France, Canada, and all that stuff. And thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And see you in the next one.